Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's live chat. I hope you guys are doing well. That you're having a good start to the weekend. I know I probably threw some of you off, so I'm going to give you a little bit of time to go ahead and sign on. I actually had to do a 7:30 live chat tonight because today happened to be a very busy but work day. So hopefully I'm still awake somewhere and you guys can give me energy and we can go ahead and just get started. This conversation is a pretty interesting one. I'm going to go ahead and as you guys sign in, I'm going to go ahead and kind of give you a little bit of an overview of what destructive bonds actually means and what this topic is going to consist of. Let me look at Instagram really briefly. It's yelling at me again, and I don't understand why. Give me 1 second, okay? I don't understand why it's not working. I don't know. Okay, bear with me, guys, okay? I'm going to have to do another link. Hi, guys. I see you signing in. I'm trying to get Instagram back up here with me. I don't know why it's not. Okay, I think we're okay. I think it was one little small button. I need to learn how to be better with this. You know what I mean, guys? I've been doing this now for so many years. I need to learn my stuff a little bit better. But let's go ahead and jump in. I see you guys signing on a little at a time. This conversation is going to be an interesting one, I think, because I think we all, in some capacity, have dealt with some kind of emotional bond that either has resulted in loss, the normal process of loss, or we have dealt with a more of an intimate partner bond that has devastated or has shifted how we see other people and relationships and how we see their place in the world. I also think that we have most of us on the channel and just most of us in the world, I think we have also experienced a major loss of some kind. And so we know what the bond does to us when it is disrupted, when it is not properly managed by both people in the relationship, right? And we also know what it feels like when we kind of step into this family. Once we're born, we step into this family dynamic, and interestingly, infants are very sensitive. I'll put it that way. They're very sensitive to their environment and who's holding them and who's around them. And the minute we become babies in the world, we develop bonds, and we recognize, even at a very young age, even an age that has nothing to do with numbers, right? So infancy, the baby is even aware then what a bond is and what it isn't. And the brain and the central nervous system of the baby helps them understand that, okay, that is mommy over there, that's dad over there. I'm safe in this bond. And I don't have to worry about being abused. I don't have to worry about being not fed. I don't have to worry about anything other than being in this bond, eating, sleeping, and growing and making sense out of the world. And isn't it interesting, guys? You probably can relate to this if you've been around babies or you've had children yourself. Isn't it interesting how aware of bonds they are? Even in infancy, they will cry and scream their heads off if you put them in the arms of somebody that isn't healthy, or you put them in the arms of somebody that they don't like or they don't know. The baby knows it. That's how young we can be when we first start recognizing and realizing what a bond actually means. Now, over the course of development, right, we develop further bonds. We either become closer or we become distant. So tonight, we're going to talk about those bonds where you've become possibly distant from those people in your world that you just know are not okay for you. Family, a relationship, friends, even work partners. You recognize that the bond is unhealthy. So what do I do when the bond is unhealthy? How do I know it's unhealthy? How do I know that I've kind of been locked into this prison with this other individual and I can't get out? Now imagine, before I start dropping some new terms, imagine if you haven't had this experience, imagine being a child, and we're talking about a child between the ages of 10 and 18. So you're well aware of how relationships should go by 10. You know exactly when you're not approved of, when you are approved of. You know when you feel loved and when you don't. You know when something's wrong and something isn't wrong. So we're going to start with 10. So let's say you are between the ages of 10 and 18. You recognize something's going on with your mother. So I'm giving you a very vibrant example. Something is wrong with mom. I recognize that, yes, I am 10. I'm still a child. But when I look at my mom, I feel emotionally unsafe. I feel emotionally detached. I don't feel cared for. I feel judged and criticized. I feel confused and uncertain. She's unpredictable. She's inconsistent. How do I meet her expectations? And over time, you may come to find out you're never going to meet her expectations. You're never going to meet her demands. And you're never going to be what she wants, because the bond between you two is just not working. Hence the title of this live chat. It's just not working. But what do you do when that's your mom, right? When that's your mother? You want to have that healthy bond, but it's just not going to happen with her. And you've learned, most likely, possibly at a very young age, that something is off here. But how do I fix that? And what do you do when the mom says, you're the problem all the time? And mom doesn't need any help. You just need to stop doing A, B, and C. You just need to do what I'm telling you to do. You just need to listen better. And so it becomes you're the problem and not mom. You're the problem and not me. And I have a lot of kids in my practice right now who's like that. I've treated them over the past 15 years of my career, and it is devastating, because that is one bond that you absolutely cannot get away from until you get to a certain age. So if you haven't experienced this, imagine that the abuse can just go on until you turn an age where you can be more independent. But even then, that unstable mother has left a major scar. So we're going to talk about that as well tonight. Now, let's get into some of the psychology language here and some of the research. I see you guys chatting it up. We're going to talk about, a bunch of stuff tonight. One, what are some common behaviors that the bond is just not working? It's never worked. It isn't working. What's wrong with this bond? So I'm going to go down some bullet points for you in a little bit, so that you can look at this and say, oh my God, this is my life, right? And I always, if you will, I always try to bring that kind of value, because you need to know that you're validated, you're making sense, you understand what's happening to you. So we're going to go down that, and then go down that bullet point list. And then I'm going to give you some research. And then I'm also going to highlight some ways that these unhealthy, destructive bonds impacts you. Let me get a sip of water, guys, and then we're going to get into some of the language here in a minute. I apologize. I'm still trying to get better. I don't know if you can tell. I sound a little weird tonight. Okay, so let's talk about this before we jump into all the meaty content. Let's start with something that's known as intermittent maltreatment and abuse. Intermittent maltreatment and abuse. Here's what psychology says. Maltreatment and abuse is not something that happens as infrequently as we think. Maltreatment and abuse, whether it's a child, an adolescent, or an adult child, it can happen in various ways, right? You can be abused physically, emotionally, sexually, psychologically. You can also be harassed. You could be stalked by some family members. We can talk about that as well tonight. You can also be harassed on your job. You can be harassed in a relationship that you're in. You can be manipulated. You can be coerced to do certain things with an ultimatum, right? You can also be emotionally extorted or exploited, meaning that a person has some information on you and they are holding that intimate information so that when you do something wrong, they're going to let all that information out there to exploit you. So we also have that. So these are a few ways that you can be, be abused. I'll put it that way. These are a few ways that you could be abused. What's scary about this kind of abuse, though, and primarily for adult children or adults in certain relationships, if the abuse is intermittent, meaning that it only happens at certain times, then the abuse can often drag on for many years in different capacities and in different ways. And it may be very hard for you to stop that person from abusing you. Let's say, for example, your father is very cold and callous. He has absolutely no empathy. He doesn't care anything about you. And, he's left the family. He's gotten remarried. He's gotten a better job. Excuse me. He does not pay child support. He did not pay child support when you were younger. Now you're an adult. He's still not supporting you. Here you are in this world all by yourself without a father. His behavior, though, has randomly impacted you. So he's not in your life 100% of the time. But when he shows up, he's argumentative, he's confrontational, he's angry and hostile, he threatens, right? He uses the legal system against you and maybe your extended family. He just becomes a monster. And even though it may not be, I see dad every week and he's mean to me, it may be, I see dad twice a year and he's abusive. I see dad once every 5 years and he's abusive. We can consider that intermittent abuse. It doesn't happen consistently. It happens at random times, but it has a very negative impact on your mind, on your heart, on your soul, and you can't handle it. It's way too much. Now, what makes an emotional bond detrimental? There's one important thing that I see all the time when it comes to unhealthy or toxic emotional bonds, and that's what we call a power differential. I'm going to say that again. Usually when there's an unhealthy and toxic bond in any relationship, I often see, and so does research in psychology on traumatic bonding, I often see what's called a power differential. A power differential is this. It's, I have this much status above you. So I'm here and you're here. You're here and dad's here. Does that make sense, guys? And so why is that? Well, a power differential can include a variety of things. A therapist, for example, can have a power differential with a client. Why? Because a client is going to the therapist for help. The client is also going to the therapist for medical treatment. The client is also going to the therapist who has been entrusted and has been upheld professionally with the promise that they're not going to sexually violate their clients. They're not going to put things in a medical record that's not correct. They're going to audit and monitor their boundaries and their clinical documentation appropriately. They're not going to exploit you. And they're most certainly not going to date you, right? Or be flirty with you, or invite you to dinner, or invite you to their birthday party. There's a clear boundary. I can give you this much of myself to help you. I care about you, but then there's this boundary, right? That's an example of a power differential. Does that happen in relationships where the bonds are unhealthy and toxic? 100%. Let's say, for example, You know, your mother's very narcissistic. She loves to be in control of everything. She wants you to wear what she wants you to wear. She buys you things that she thinks that you're going to like, although she only wants you to take her, you know, things that she wants you to have. She doesn't allow you to have an opinion outside of her own, right? She's very controlling and she's very condescending. Where's the power differential with a narcissistic parent? Well, the power differential could be in the details of, I am parent, you are child. I am parent, you are child. Or it could be, I have more money than you and you're asking me for a loan. Makes sense, guys? So in unhealthy toxic bonds within a family, within a friendship, within a work situation, there is often a power differential. Gender can also be a power differential. If you're in a relationship with someone, right, and there's a male who is abusing and neglecting and manipulating you, there's a power differential there. You know, just because men often hold a very powerful place in society. That's changing a little at a time, isn't it, guys? But for the most part, men hold a powerful position over women. And so that can also be a power differential. So you want to keep that in mind as you're looking at these unhealthy, toxic, dysfunctional bonds in your life. Am I in a situation where there's a power differential where somebody is here and I am here? You know, that's a good way to kind of evaluate what your bonds are. Now, you guys are very familiar, before I go to the chat box, you guys are very familiar with trauma bonding. I know you have to be traumatic bonding. I should call it, you can call it either one, but I prefer the traumatic bonding. You guys are very familiar with that, but let me just briefly go over it. So traumatic bonding is basically built on the premise that there's intermittent reinforcement and there is also intermittent punishment. So intermittent reinforcement, again, is I'm doing something every now and then that's going to influence your behavior, right? So if you're in a trauma bond with your father, for example, here's what dad does. Dad hurts you. He disappoints you. He uses the power differential against you, right? Because he's a man. So maybe he feels like he's up here compared to you. So he uses the power differential. 1 minute he's mean, cold, callous, unempathic, careless, manipulative, right? We can give him all those negative definitions or labels. So he's being mean to you, he's cold, the list goes on. So he may be like that for a good month. But come February, he may be the nicest dad ever. He may love you, cherish you, praise you, text you every day, ask you every morning how you are, wish you a good night every night, right? He may also say to you, you know, Dad's so proud of you, you know, you're my favorite, you know, that kind of stuff. But then March may come and he's back to being the devil. So that's intermittent reinforcement. It's every now and then I reinforce you by giving you something that you want from me, which is love, affection, praise, safety, security, the list goes on. But don't bank on it, because if you think I'm going to remain that way, think again, because when we hit March, I am now going to be a very different dad. And that's not going to be good. Excuse me, guys. Right? Excuse me. So that is intermittent reinforcement. Now, one last thing before I go to the chat box is punishment may also become a part of this puzzle. Excuse me. Can you believe I'm still dying, guys? It's been like a whole 3 weeks. Okay. Can you imagine how this can make you feel when, you know, 1 month dad loves me, the next month he doesn't? And then punishment can come as well. And the punishment could be, I'm not going to talk to you for 6 months. You know, I'm not going to talk to you for 6 weeks. But I will come back around and say, you know what? You're my favorite daughter. You know, Come on, son, let's go shoot some hoops, right? And so this is that back and forth kind of traumatic bonding seesaw, and it keeps you stuck, and it plays with your mind, and it's an unhealthy bond. Why? Because it's not a bond that is built on trust, safety, love, security, none of it. It is built on false ideas of what the relationship is. And sometimes you can fall for that because it feels so normal, right? But then other times, I think we can be very, very aware, even subconsciously, that this is not a healthy bond. This is going absolutely nowhere, and it needs to stop because I'm going to end up being the victim here. And that's basically what happens. All right, I'm going to go to the chat box. Thank you so much, Jessica J. I see you giving me some tips. I've been doing everything. I've been literally doing everything, and I'm still sick. I really do think it's stress. My job doesn't let me take a break. Okay, let me go to the chat box, and then we're going to jump into this. You're going to want to know, what are some common behaviors here? How do I know that I'm stuck in this trauma bond? How do I know that I'm stuck in this bond that's not okay? What are those signs? What are those barriers? So we're going to get into that. And then I also want to go over something known as cognitive distortions, which are skewed ways that we think based on our experience and how we're looking at things. So we're going to get into that in just a minute. Let me just start welcoming you guys. Pink Meadows, always glad to see you. Love the positivity. Thank you for that. Welcome. I see Sun and Sunflowers. I'm so glad that you made a live as well. Good to see you. Nancy R, good to see you. You were early. I saw that. Starburst, thank you so much for that compliment. Hello and welcome. So good to see you back. Brianne D. Hopefully I said that correctly. Hello and welcome. Good to see you tonight. You too, Elizabeth. Good to see you. Yeah. Yes. Trauma survivor. Yes. Remind me, would you please? So glad you remembered. Thank you so much for that. That's awesome. Then I can go ahead and address what you were saying. But welcome to tonight's chat. Glad to see you. Joe Stephenson. Hello. Welcome. Glad to see you. Yeah, and I don't remember seeing you. So welcome to the channel. Lore Fit, good evening to you as well. Star, hello. Glad to have you. I also see Nicole B. Hello. I know that's your first live. I was scrolling through and I'm like, I see some new faces. So it's really good to see you. Welcome. I had to be sick on this one. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Jessica J. That's so sweet of you. Hello and welcome. Glad to see you as well. And thank you for the tips. Oh my God. As soon as I'm done with the live chat tonight, I'm literally going to run to Target and grab every cold, tool I can find, okay, and put it in my basket. Half the battle knowing is hello and welcome. Good to see you. Half the battle knowing is, as I was just listening to one of your old streams, and here you go. Yep. Hopefully this is going to be a better stream than the last one. Abundant Life, good to see you as well. I also see GB Joe. Hello and welcome to tonight's live chat. Okay, I'm looking for comments, guys. Bear with me as I scroll. Yvette, hello, welcome. Happy Friday. Ellie Wynn, hello. Thank you so much for that. I hope it's going to be helpful. Indigo Sass, haven't seen you in a little while. Welcome back. Cheyenne, welcome back. Good to see you. T Mac, it's good to see you as well. Okay, the good glow. Let me look at this. Yeah, it's raining here too. Man, I love Baltimore. I was there for a conference a couple months ago, and I literally was holding on to the hotel doorknobs. I'm like, I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave. So where I'm at is boring. It really is. Good to see you, though. Welcome. Nancy R says, I would hand over my baby, and then I had to sneak out of the room just so they could hold her for a while. I would hand over my baby, and then I had to sneak out of the room just so they could hold her for a while. Did I miss that? You said, Nancy, I was so different from my mom. Ooh, yeah. I'm not sure. I'm going to come back to that because I'm not sure what that meant. It'll come to me. It's just my brain is all over the place, you know? Dawn One, hello, welcome back. So good to see you as well. Orlando, good to see you. Good, good. Good to see you. Okay, looking for comments, guys. Bear with me. Karina Ether, I hope I said that correctly. Welcome. It's good to see you. Longevity Rituals. It's been a while, but it's always good to see you back in the chats. Ken Eisen, hello and welcome back. Man, there's a lot of you on here. Wow. So I'm guessing that, thank you, Jessica J. I see a lot of comments. I'm just trying to pinpoint which one I want to start with. It looks like a lot of you can relate to this topic, huh? Laura Fitz says, you feel tense around and they also trigger you intensely. I think you meant you feel tense around them and they also trigger you intensely when you are not aware of what's going on. Yeah, let me say that if you are in a situation where there's an unhealthy bond, there's a trauma bond, there's an abusive bond, there's a manipulative bond, some kind of bond that is really emotionally taking you down, you have to keep in mind that there is fight or flight, okay? And usually our central nervous systems, you know, the amygdala, I'll put it this way first, because I think this makes better sense. The amygdala, which is our emotional center of the brain, once it senses danger, the next thing it has to do is kickstart a variety of other brain related regions. And that then starts that whole cycle of fight or flight. So it really is like a, I don't know what we could call it here. It's kind of like it's a whole machine process, you know? It hits the brain first, then the prefrontal lobes, which is right behind the forehead, the part of our executive functioning, the frontal lobes starts making sense out of what's happening. And then fight or flight gets kicked off, and then it's hard to get it to stop. And especially if you are living in the same house or you're in the same area with somebody who's very abusive, manipulative, controlling, and fight or flight just continues on like an engine. And sometimes it never shuts off, even when you're sleeping. And that's a very scary part. So I agree with that, Lord Fett. That's usually how that goes. Okay, a seat at the King's table with Tanisha. Hello and welcome. Good to see you back tonight. Mom Tune, I almost called you Moon Tune. Oh my God, I'm having a hard time here tonight, guys. Mom Tune, good to see you. Welcome back. Indigo Sass says, same thing with my father. My parents left me to face this world alone. Oh my God, that's so hard. I'm so sorry, Indigo Sass. That is rough. I just told a child that the other day. I said, you know, it's not your fault that your mom and your dad have absolutely left you to fend for yourself in this broken world. It's their responsibility to help you. So guess what? They've got to deal with that burden at some point, and it may burden them as they age or maybe when they die. Who knows? We don't know, right? Don One says, my mother's husband was cold and callous. So was she. Wow. Yeah, absolutely. What did they say? Water seeks its own level? I probably messed that up, but you know where I'm going with that one, Don One. Eclone Jitto 99, hello and welcome. Good to see you back. Haven't seen you in a little while. Michelle Lynn, hello. Happy to see you too. You're always so kind. Good to see you. Ellie Wynn says they are nice to strangers, though, sometimes. And that's because subconsciously they know that that is the social way to be. You know, that is the social way to be. And, you know, if that means smiling, dressing like you're put together, maybe even acting like they love you as the child or whoever you're in a relationship with, they can act like they love you very much. But as soon as you close that door, forget about it. Right? Happens all the time. Nancy R says, my father was consistently a narcissist, but at some point lived with his second family. My mother was like a light switch, very unstable. Yeah. Clinically, we call that labile mood, right? It's a labile mood, meaning The mood goes up and down and around and around. And it's hard for us to, as clinicians, identify when something is wrong, or it's hard for us to identify what's wrong when the person's emotions are all over the place. So we call it labile moods, you know? And so it sounds like that's what was going on with your mom, Nancy R. Did you know that sometimes unhealthy bonds can be the result of a parent that has a borderline personality? You know, imagine having a parent, a mother who is constantly triggering you. I will share a story with you that I had a couple years ago, but I'm going to do it in just a minute. But imagine having a parent like that, right? You know, you think, you know, my mom loves me, she cares about me, everything's going to be okay. And the next minute she wants to strangle you. And you don't know what that switch was, you know, what triggered her. And I have a family like that now, but I will share in just a little bit here a story of one of my previous clients that I had so many years ago. And I think it's going to be relatable to you for the most part, Nancy R. Adila, hello, welcome, good to see you. Welcome back. A couple more comments, guys. Hey, Hayes White, I hope I said that correctly. Hello and welcome, good to see you. Glad to have you in tonight's live chat. Says, well, you just described my mom. I'm sure you're going to hear more. I know you're going to hear more tonight. Michelle Lynn says, Tamara, I went through coercive control, and my therapist said I had Stockholm syndrome. It was traumatic. I was dating a diagnosed BPD who had sociopathic traits. My goodness. Sorry, guys. Excuse me. Let me say, Michelle, you did bring that up in one of the live chats that I was doing, and I was scrolling down after the fact. I was scrolling down and I said, oh my goodness, it looks like this is something that I should have addressed during the live chat. So I'm glad you're bringing it back up. Honestly, and let me just say, it could be Stockholm syndrome, but I think a lot of people get Stockholm syndrome confused with traumatic bonding. And I wonder, as we go along tonight, if you may see yourself in some of this, because we're going to jump back into the content in just a little bit. But I wonder if you're going to see yourself under more of the heading of traumatic bonding rather than Stockholm syndrome. Let me point out, for those of you who are not aware of either of those conditions or classifications, one important piece really makes sense, and it really pulls the picture together for a lot of people. I usually tell even my clients, if they feel like this is something they're dealing with, that Stockholm syndrome and traumatic bonding has one core feature that really destroys everybody's lives. It destroys their lives, all the victims of Stockholm syndrome and traumatic bonding. And that is the over-identification with the abuser, the over-identification with the abuser. Whether it's traumatic bonding or Stockholm syndrome, the victim, I'll put it this way, the victim tends to, in some series of events and in some interesting way, they take the lens off of their own hurt and pain and abuse and maltreatment, and they put it on to the abuser, and the abuser then gets the love, the compassion, the forgiveness, the sensitivity that the victim should be getting. Why? Because in some way there is an over-identification with the abuser. An example of that would be, you know, I would feel like him. Let's say you're in a dating relationship. Okay, this is your boyfriend. You might say, after he just snapped out, destroyed the entire living room, he's been yelling at you, you know, he gripped you up, and you were going to call the police, but you let it go because you sat for a while, you cried it out, and now you realize he was having a very bad day. Okay, this is usually the excuses that I get in session. He had a very bad day. He just got a new job. His mom is in the hospital. His dad just moved out of the country. Excuse me. And here I am making another demand, and I just set him off. It's my fault. I set him off because I don't like being pressured either. I remember when I was pressured in 1950. I don't want to do that to him. And I understand how that feels. So it was my fault, not his fault. And so that is basically how that goes. It's this over identification with the abuser. And in a very interesting way, you kind of bring this big situation that's traumatic down to this little mustard seed. And you say, you know what? It was my fault. Or that was me when I was 17. And so that's what's scary about Stockholm syndrome and also traumatic bonding. There's an over identification with the abuser. I know you know what I'm talking about, Michelle Lynn. It's very, very scary, right? Sammy D, hello and welcome. Good to see you in tonight's live chat. We're going to jump into the content in just a minute here. Cheyenne says, my ex-girlfriend was 42 and I am 27. My goodness, the age difference there. Do you think there is a power differential? 100%. 100%. There would be a power differential with you and me. You know, I at least have, you're 27. Yeah, I have 10 years on you. I have 10 years on you. And I know there are some women who do like younger men. I'm not one of them. So, you know, anytime I see someone who's older dating a younger man or vice versa, I usually question, I'm like, why? You know what I mean? Like, don't you want somebody who's at least older than you maybe, or at your same age level? You know what I mean? There's definitely a power differential there, because somebody who's older than you has most likely been here longer. And if you go back to childhood in your mind and do the age difference there, then you can see the power differential sometimes much clearer. You know what I mean? Like, if, for example, you know, let's say that you were 17. So if she's 42, do the math for me, guys. I'm terrible at math. Excuse me. I'm so bad at math. But let's say you're 17 and she's 27, right? That's a huge power differential. You're 17 just trying to figure out who you are, what shoes you want to wear tomorrow. And she's 27, most likely has graduated college, most likely has her own apartment, most likely, right? So yes, there's definitely a power differential there for sure. And I think that's why sometimes younger men and younger girls, they get manipulated because the older partner, not always, the older partner in some situations, they know that there's a power differential, and that's why they're dating you in the first place. That's something to think about, right, Shan? Adila says, so it's a cyclical. Yeah, it is. Roller coaster, a love and hate with a parent, love and hate with a parent, and love and hate with a friend, a spouse, the list goes on. All right, you're going to be my last one before we go back to the content. Let's go down the road of cognitive distortions first, and then I'm going to give you common behaviors. Cognitive distortions are this, and you guys let me know in the chat box if you've ever experienced any of these. Cognitive distortions are skewed and sometimes imbalanced ways that we see ourselves and that we see our situations. We see our interactions with the world. You know, they are basically the negative thoughts that go through your mind. You know, I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. How could I let that happen? Right? Why didn't I do anything about it? Why did I allow this bond? How did I get so bonded? I'm always making mistakes, right? All those negative thoughts can fill your mind, and they can go over and over and over in your mind to a point of obsession or rumination. And that can sink your mind. It can sink your heart. It can sink your stamina, because something that's an obsession or that's a rumination, it never gives you a break, right? So then those negative thoughts become a part of you. Well, a cognitive distortion is similar, but what it does for the most part, for most people, I would say, is it kind of keeps you stuck in this negative bowl of toxicity. An example of a cognitive distortion would be something known as mind reading. So your narcissistic mother, who's very covert, she likes things to be prim and proper. You know, she doesn't like you to look out of place, wants you not to speak a certain way. She has her demands, right? So let's say you're sitting with your mom, you guys are doing something together, right? It could be talking to somebody, it could be, you know, you're just over for Sunday brunch or whatever. And you may look at your mom, and believe 100% that you know what she's thinking about you just by looking at her. You may be wrong, but then you may be right. Who knows? But the cognitive distortion in this example is mind reading, that I'm looking at my mom and I think I know exactly what she's thinking about me. She's thinking that I'm a failure. She's thinking that I don't deserve. She's thinking that I'm not very intelligent, mature, the list goes on. So that's one example of cognitive distortion, mind reading. Well, if you're in a toxic, unhealthy bond, primarily a trauma bond, it is possible that you can actually look at that person who's destroying you and believe that you are reading from their face, from their disposition, from their passive aggressive communication with you, that they're angry, they need your forgiveness, and that you are supposed to give them a green light. That's an example of that. I once had a client who would always look at her husband when he was angry. She said, and I can look at him and see that he needed me to forgive him. That wasn't the case. But her skewed awareness of her relationship and this toxic bond caused her to believe that she understood things. She did not. It was more of a desire and a wish of hers. It wasn't a reality. Another example of a cognitive distortion would be generalization. This happened to me over there, so if I go over here, it's likely going to happen to me over here as well. Generalization. It's the same kind of unhealthy thought process that we just talked about, and it kind of keeps you stuck. It keeps you blind. Now, what are some common behaviors, though, that creates that trauma bond? Research in psychology says rationalization. Rationalization is something that can kind of keep you stuck in those trauma bonds. Why? Because if you rationalize and you minimize, it's a little bit easier to deal with that bond than it would be if you just were to look at it as it is. We have to also keep in mind that the abuser, the mother, the father, the spouse, the friend, whoever the abuser is in this unhealthy bond, we have to keep in mind that they have tools and tricks and tactics that they use to keep you stuck. One, and you guys tell me in the chat box if you've dealt with this, one is love bombing. Don't you hear that all the time? All the time. I know I do. I have clients come into session with me and they're like, I think my boyfriend is love bombing me and now he's gaslighting me. And I'm like, oh God, here we go with these terms again. But a lot of people really do, on a serious note, in these kind of trauma bonds or unhealthy bonds, family bonds, I'm going to say also toxic bonds, they do feel like the abuser is giving and loving and showering them with affection. And, it's just way too much giving. And basically that is to maintain some kind of relationship with you. I'm just going to give them everything that they want from me until I stop. Right? So love bombing is a way that they kind of keep you stuck. Another common behavior that psychology points out is you may find that the abuser in that bond has always had either mental health problems or a personality disorder or something of the kind, maybe both. You may find that they have a problem, but because you're in this unhealthy bond with them, you're starting to feel depressed. You're starting to feel very anxious. You're starting to feel very afraid of being abandoned and abused, right? And so the abuser can sense that sometimes. And so what do? Research in psychology says on trauma bonds that they often intentionally put a trauma bond into motion, right? They treat you extra nice, again, until they get tired of it, and then they go back to abusing you. So research in psychology says love bombing does happen, not gang stalking, I'm so sorry, guys. Gaslighting, I'm thinking about something else at the same time. Gaslighting happens, sucking up happens, trying to build some kind of trust and dependency, that happens. You may also see criticism that happens in this kind of a toxic bond. You're also going to see somebody who's going to run to your rescue and protect you. This is how an abuser creates the trauma bond intentionally. They know how to repair what they have done. Does that make sense, guys? Let me get a sip. My throat's getting dry again. I am sorry. Okay, so I know that most of you have most likely seen this, that there's often a back and a forth. And so research suggests that this back and forth between the abuser and you really does bind you. And it makes it really difficult to not only see the abuse, but get out of the bond. Let me tell you the story briefly about the family that I had so many years ago. I felt so sad for this young man. He was 14, came to me when he was 9, but mom's mental health got worse over time. So he came to me for his own anxiety, his own depression. We treated him for 2 years, myself and a colleague who was giving prescribing medication. And he seemed to be doing really well. Well, all of a sudden, after his 14th birthday, he started, complaining of wanting to take his own life. He started complaining about failing in school. The teachers were calling his parents every day. He was getting suspended. He was really refusing to do his work. He wasn't being cooperative. Then he started cutting. He attempted suicide. There was a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression. And one time, I asked him, he showed me something on his phone. He wanted to show me a poster he got in his bedroom. And he's showing me this poster. But as he's showing me the poster on his bedroom wall, he moves the video camera, which was his phone, but he moves the phone. And on his phone, not only do I see the poster on the wall, but I also see a room that is completely trashed. And I asked him, I says, why are your curtains hanging off the window like that? And what's all the garbage in your room? And why is there glass? And I saw his bed ripped to shreds, his dresser, what do you call those things? His dresser drawers were open. Some of them were hanging out of the dresser. There was red fingerprints on the wall, like somebody had lipstick. And I said, what is happening here? And, he immediately broke down and started crying. And I remember going over to him to comfort him. And I'm thinking, this is a 14-year-old boy. What is going on? And I said, you've got to talk to me. And he says, the reason I haven't talked to you is my mom told me that if I tell anybody how I was living, how my mom was raising me, that I would be put in foster care and taken away. He says, and even though my mom's very abusive, I don't want to be taken away from her. So they had this very enmeshed emotional bond that was not okay. Mom sought reassurance and support from this young man. She parentified him. Guys, we talk about this all the time. There was also adultification. So he became an adult way faster than he should have. And she would talk to him like he was her therapist. And it was a total power differential there, guys. It was a total emotional extortion or emotional exploitation. I'll put it that way. Because she knew exactly what was going to happen, that he was going to tell someone and cry about it. And she didn't want that to happen because then she'd get in trouble. But that's not even the meat of the story with this young man. Because once I asked him, how did your room get this way? He said, my mom did it. My mom had a really bad night with her boyfriend. They were arguing. She was drunk. She came in my room while I was asleep and she tore it to shreds. And that is her lipstick on my wall. And he said to me, and she told me not to tell you and not to tell a teacher or anybody that could get her in trouble. Trauma bond, very overly enmeshed bond. And when I was able to speak with mom, she was very irate, very upset, very disrespectful to me. Thankfully, there was a father involved who kept this young man in treatment, but the emotional bond between he and his mom was very inappropriate. And there were some concerns about incest. There were some concerns about child sexual abuse in this case. But there was a cycle, and this is why I'm mentioning this as an example. There was a cycle of love bombing. There was a cycle of gaslighting. You're not seeing what you think you're seeing. Mom's going to buy you that video game you've been wanting. So do your best at school and don't mention anything to your therapist. That's he was a smart boy. He recorded her telling him that. Don't say anything to your therapist. So there was love bombing, there was gaslighting, there was trust and dependency being developed over time between the two of them. There was also what we call love addiction. So in a sense, there was a dependency that was, I need my mom's love and affection. So there was a little bit of love addiction in there. There was also devaluation and criticism that was in there as well. There was also a loss of self with this young man. So these are all examples of how a traumatic, unhealthy, toxic bond can kind of keep you stuck, right? Because little by little, that relationship starts to unfold. And then you can see over time that, oh my goodness, right? You're probably going to step back and say, oh my goodness, I have been manipulated. I have been exploited for all this time. And I never saw it coming. It's not easy to see those different experiences, excuse me. It's not easy to see them when they are happening. Usually you identify them at the very end after you've become a victim. So let me go over them one more time. I'm going to give you the research. I'm going to take a break and then talk to you guys in the chat box. But let's go over them one more time. So there's love bombing. There's a development of trust and dependency. You can also look at these as stages. And this is what happens. Let me clarify. This is what happens when you're becoming too enmeshed. You're becoming too close. The bond is unhealthy. So there's love bombing, trust and dependency. There's criticism and devaluation. There's a loss of self. There's love addiction, right? There's rationalizing and minimizing. There's manipulation. Did I say gaslighting? I think I did. There's manipulation. And there is also emotional extortion. And those are the stages that most people end up going through as they're developing. Sometimes you're developing a bond and don't even realize it. As they're developing this bond, a lot of people fail to see these stages. And so you may want to take this down as stages. Now, let me tell you about the research just briefly before I go to the chat box. Some research suggests that there is such complexity in trying to identify these stages of bonding that we are lacking in research. We need way more research on what happens between a mother and a son, a mother and a daughter, a father and his children. What happens in that bond? What happens in the toxic family bond? What happens in the romantic bond, right? And so we're missing a lot of research just because of the complexity of these stages of bonding and how they get started and how complicated it is to kind of unwind you from that bond, so we need way more research. Some research that I was looking at last night also suggested that traumatic bonding seemed to get worse around COVID time. I don't think that's pretty shocking. What do you guys think? It was being in the house all the time, not being able to go anywhere, fearing that you were going to be sick, right? Not having anywhere to really go because all the things that we're used to was closing early. So in that entire scenario, traumatic bonding and other healthy, relationship bonds were becoming an issue. And so it increased during the time of COVID. And that is a very scary part, There's also some research that says that if you have some kind of love dependency, so in other words, I am dependent upon other people loving me to feel A, B, and C, or I need this person to come into my world because I need to be loved and I need to feel love. That seemed to increase as well over COVID time. And this is according to research in, I'll post it in the description box for you, but this is on research around intimate partner violence. Okay, guys, let me go to the chat box and take a little bit of a break here. And then we're going to talk about how does this impact you? And then we can go from there. Oh, okay. France, I'm going to mess this up again. Francophile Patine. You have to correct me on that one. Hello and welcome, by the way. Glad to see you in tonight's live chat. You are responding to Cheyenne. So we're going to go to a different comment. Graham Langley, hello and welcome. Glad to see you in tonight's live chat. And welcome to the channel. I don't remember seeing you. I feel a little off tonight, so forgive me. Hopefully I'm more myself in tomorrow's live chat. Graham says, oh, yes, I am a victim of that 6-week thing. Blow up argument, silence treatment, then 6 weeks later. How are you going? Are you okay? Let's hug it out. Okay, I see what you're saying. It's a little choppy, but you're saying you're a part of that as well, right? That dynamic where they do something to you and then they come back and they're like ready to be nice to you and love you and care for you. Honestly, it's up to you as to whether or not you're going to accept that disposition, or if you're going to accept it temporarily and talk to them later. You know what I mean? I've had people do that to me. I've had clients do that to me, you know. A couple years ago, I had a client whose mom was very psychologically unstable, and she not only was a problem for her children, but she was also a problem for me, and also a problem for her husband, and a problem for every other therapist in the world, because she did not want to get help. She had a lot of issues, including paranoid schizophrenia. She would not take her medication. I don't know if you guys, a lot of you probably haven't heard my story yet, but I'll just briefly let you know that there was a situation with me back in 2016, when I was in a group private practice. It was 5 or 6 of us in a practice. And I had sadly become the victim of stalking, because very briefly, I'm going to tell you, just so you can have a little bit of an idea as to what I'm talking about. There was a mother, she was very sick, had paranoid schizophrenia, hadn't been sleeping. She was on marijuana really heavily, on alcohol very heavily. She became homeless. Her husband filed for divorce, and her children were asked to come to me by the grandmother for therapy. And you know, this mother found out that I was the child's therapist. She looked me up online, immediately got intimidated and just really jealous. She couldn't understand, why do my kids get excited to see you and they never get excited to see me? And I invited her into a session to give her some insights, and it turned into, you know, her calling me throughout many times of the day for no reason, sometimes ringing the group practice phone and asking for me and then hanging up. Then she started parking in the parking lot to watch me get in my car. She started calling me on my work cell phone. She got it from one of her kids. It was an awful situation for a few months. And I completely just got drained from the whole encounter. Well, let me say, this is the same person who needs a lot of help even to this day. So I've heard from a colleague. And what would happen in that dynamic is she would step out and do all of these bizarre, weird things that was unhealthy and sometimes illegal, but then come to session or be in the waiting room and act like nothing ever happened. And so it was up to me whether or not I was going to accept that and say, you know what, let's just act like nothing ever happened. You didn't see me go to my car several times in the day. We're going to act like you didn't call me 1,900 times last night while I was trying to sleep. We're not going to, we're not going to acknowledge that. So it was up to me. Am I going to ignore it with her, or am I going to acknowledge it? And I decided to acknowledge it. So long story short, Graham, that's the decision that you have to make. Am I going to act like you're not bypassing my boundaries? Am I going to act as if you're, stable, or am I going to address you? And so that's something you gotta figure out, right? Thank you, Juby. I hope that was helpful. Juby Joe, thank you so much for that. Yeah, thank you. I can't kick these symptoms. I'm really trying. Jessica J says, in-laws have always treated my husband, their son, as if he is 12, showing no respect for what he's accomplished in his life. Yeah, absolutely. GB Joe, not GB Joe, Jessica J, you know, from, I think it was last chat or so, I think I said, if you have somebody who doesn't seem to mature and they keep doing the same things over time, most likely it's a personality disorder. So I wouldn't be surprised if the in-laws also have personality disorders, you know? Oh, thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much. I do have emergency C. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Thank you. My mom was like, why don't you use this big, like, she was like this big, literally, I'm going to show it to you guys one day, this big water bottle. And I'm like, how do you even, okay, never mind. But she had tons of emergency C in there. So maybe I can grab some. Thank you so much, Ken. I appreciate you for that. You guys are trying to take care of me now. Thank you so much. That's so sweet. Girl mom, hello. Welcome. Good to see you. Sarara, thank you so much for that tip. You guys are lovely. Thank you so much. Welcome. Good to see you, Sarara. Let me keep moving. I'm looking for comments. M and Odell and JD Merritt Master Group and Mark Lee. Hello and welcome. Glad to see you. Thank you so much for all the tips, guys. I'm going to come back when this live chat, when we sign off, and I'm going to write down all these tips. Thank you. Pure Blue 22, hello and welcome. Good to see you and welcome to the channel. Pure Blue 22 says, yeah, I feel like my nervous system is fried. Yeah, absolutely. You're probably burned out. That's the term, burned out. Orlando, I always love that passage. Yep, they're going to reap what they sow. As a kid, I used to say they're going to sow what they reap. My mom's like, oh my God, that's not how you say it. But yes, I do believe people reap what they sow. Yeah. Sarara says, separating from my family has ripped the Band-Aid off feelings I thought were long resolved. I can't even call it anxiety, just orienting, like falling into a pit backwards. How do children survive? Wow, that's a very painful thing. I will say it is disorienting, isn't it? Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. The best way to deal with that, Sorara, is to do it the way you're doing it. And for those of you who are also watching, this is for you as well, that anytime you're dealing with a bond of any kind and you try to step out of that bond, just know that there's going to be some kind of fallout, if you will, some kind of consequence that's going to make you feel like either you didn't make the best decision, either you jumped to the wrong decision too soon, right? I can't survive kind of mentality is most likely going to occur. There's going to be a variety of emotional and psychological experiences that you're going to go through. You know, it's almost like once you jump out of the lion's den, now you've got to figure out how to survive. And Sorara, that is a very difficult thing to do. So you've got to do some introspection and ask yourself for the next couple of days, weeks, and maybe months and years, where do I need to be? And do I feel like my decision has been the most beneficial, right? So, and you may have to repair some bonds as well. And that is okay too, you know? It's hard to step out of a bond. It is. It is. The Good Glow says, walking on eggshells around that woman all the freaking time. Yeah, I learned not to say anything because whatever you say will be criticized, and then the rage kicks in for hours. Absolutely. Absolutely. I have young people now that come and see me, kids, adolescents, young adults who say that their parents are that way. If I say anything, there's going to be this huge explosion. My colleague is now dealing with a situation where she has a family that every time the mother acts out, because the mother in this scenario is not stable, every time the mother acts out, she causes her children to regress, you know? And we're not talking, I'm angry and I'm crying. We're not talking, I just slammed the door because I'm frustrated. We're talking things like, I'm going to kill myself and you're going to be regretful once I do. That's an example of something that she has said. Another example would be something like, something like, I hope you enjoy when I finally take my life because you're going to push me there. Things like that are being said, and it's causing the children to feel insecure. It's causing the children to be afraid. And so, do you think her kids want to go to her and say, Mom, I was just suspended today because I had to stand up for myself? Somebody punched me and I had to stand up for myself. He's not going to tell her that, right? Because we're going to have another big explosion. And unfortunately, these kids know very well that Mom's going to explode, so I'm not going to say anything, you know? So you're very right. That is a definite dynamic, and it's a very scary one. Yeah. Trauma survivor says, I can relate. I was counting on my extended family to love and care for me and to finally have a family home, but only to be seemingly denied of that, all because they raised my brother and not me. Yeah, you mention that all the time. And that just seems like something that is stuck for you. And it's like stuck in your heart and in your mind. There's a lot of work that needs to be done there to heal. You know, I think you and I talked about it in one of my previous chats. Yeah. MS. Hello and welcome. Glad to see you in tonight's live chat. Excuse me. Okay. Excuse me, guys. MS says, thank you for covering this topic. You've given me a glimmer of hope and I'll happily take it. Oh, that's so good to know. Thank you for that. And you're welcome. MS goes on to say, I'll take this glimmer and expand it as I silently plan an exit from a family of psychopaths, narcissists, etc. Yeah, I totally understand that. Let me tell you, like I tell my clients, before you make the next move, really do some introspection and make sure that that's the right move. Because, and this is for you, Sarara, as well, because if you jump too fast at a resolution or at something that you think is a resolution, keep in mind, you may not be able to go back and fix it. So once you make that step, it will likely be final, because research in psychology around family estrangement suggests this, that once you become estranged, that family you've left behind or that relationship is going to build new traditions. They're going to build new expectations. They're going to become most likely closer with each other. And you're going to be the one on the outside looking in. So you want to make sure before you make that step that you're doing the right thing. And it takes a very long time sometimes to make that, you know, to make that decision in a way that is wise and healthy. Leslie A, hello and welcome. Glad to see you in a live chat tonight. She says, that's my mother. Yep. It's very hard when it's your mother, isn't it? As Elizabeth Pepper, hello and welcome. Good to see you in tonight's live chat. Elizabeth Pepper says, it wasn't until I learned of the impact of trauma in neurodevelopmental stages that I was able to develop self-compassion and stop chronic self-blaming. All victims should really learn about it. Yeah, that's an important point. I appreciate you for bringing that up. Not everybody has challenges during the neurodevelopmental stage. We know that, right, Elizabeth Pepper? But is it good to go, you know, pick up a book that can maybe help you with that? Yes. A book that can kind of guide you a little bit is by Dr. Perry. It's The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. So if you type in Dr. Perry, Perry, the Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, that's one example. That's one book that talks about neurodevelopmental levels and how the brain and the mind and the central nervous system can all work together to create a very complicated person, you know? And he does a great job in kind of breaking this down in layman terms, right? He doesn't use a lot of big words. So go ahead and check that book out. I think it's a wonderful book. Sylvia Love Jones, hello and welcome. Glad to see you in tonight's live chat. Yes, you're welcome, Sammy D. You're welcome. Michelle Lynn says, Tamara, you described that perfectly. Thank you. You're so awesome. Thank you so much. And you're awesome too. You're awesome too. I like all of you. I'm like, I should adopt every last one of you, but I'm sure I'm sure you wouldn't want to live with me. Okay, especially with this virus, because I'm getting everybody sick, to be honest. KD Merit Master Group. There was a comment that you said earlier. I want to go back to it. I have to find it. So I'm not going to say anything here because I feel like I'm coming in on a weird comments. Like I'm not getting the first half of that. So I'm going to skip that. Okay. All right. Let me find you. Orlando, you're hilarious. Orlando says, Tamara, what's a good age difference between men and women? I don't know. I can only speak for me, personally. I mean, I certainly wouldn't be interested in anyone who's like 27, like Cheyenne, right? Like what Cheyenne is asking me is that a power differential? And if I look at that, yes, because somebody who's 27 may not be somebody who has experienced certain patterns in life that maybe a 37-year-old would. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what would be a healthy age difference. I'm not going to profess to, I'm not going to put myself out there, I'll put it that way, and say that there is a perfect age. But you do want to consider that power differential, right? Because let me just say this as well, in regards to this, that a bond between two people could be at any age, right? However, you almost have to ask in the back of your mind, what does a 42-year-old see in a 27-year-old? Because the 42-year-old probably just wants, for lack of a clinical term, a boy toy, or they want to be young because they're not ready to grow up, or there's something going on there psychologically that makes them attracted to a 27-year-old, right? I once had a client who was 45 and she was dating a 21-year-old and had no shame about it, But the power differential there was he had a mother, kind of a mother figure, and she had the little boy that she could not biologically bear. So there you have it. They both got their needs met, but in odd ways. So without getting into this whole thing, it's complicated. I'll leave it at that. Live life. It has been a while. So missed you on the channel. So glad to have you back. As you say, it's great to be back. So appreciate all your comments. I was going through a previous live chat, and then guys, I'm getting back into the content. I was going through a previous live chat and I saw you and I'm like, where's Live Life? Oh my God. So good to see you. Mr. Ellipsis, hello and welcome back. It's been a while for you as well. Good to see you. Mr. Ellipsis says, you mentioned cognitive distortion and mind reading. My mom used to do this all the time, so much, I think she actually read it one time. LOL. Great topic, Tam. Thank you so much for that. She may have. There's psychopaths and sociopaths and narcissists who go straight to Barnes and Noble, that go straight to Amazon. They pick out the books that they're going to read, and then they, like acting as if they're some kind of therapist or professional. That is often a manipulation tool that they use. But also, let me say here, a cognitive distortion, it can also, the cognitive distortion of mind reading can also be a good thing in some ways, because it kind of causes you to pause for a second and try to pick up on what that other person is, maybe giving off, what's the vibe with this other person. So sometimes looking at somebody and kind of mind reading, if you will, there is a positive side to that. I meant to mention that earlier. Not all cognitive distortions are bad, but it's when and how you use them that's the problem. I hope that makes sense. Let me mention here too, and this is your fault, Mr. Ellipsis. I'm going to mention one more thing about cognitive distortions, that if you are in a bond that is toxic, it's possible that the distortion of black or white thinking, or we call it polarization. Black or white thinking or polarization. We can call it either or. There's a possibility that you can get stuck in that bond because of black and white thinking, right? Let's say, for example, you're in a relationship with somebody, right? You're engaged to be married, but here's the problem. He gets upset, you get upset, both of you yell at each other, And it is not a good thing because you've wanted to call off the wedding several different times, right? So this is an example for you. Let's say you, as the one who really wants this wedding, you start seeing things in black and white terms, and you start making excuses. There's no gray area. It's either A or B. It's either that or this. There's no in between. And so that cognitive distortion of polarization or black and white thinking can really keep you narrow. And sadly, sometimes it keeps you bonded to the abuser. And it may make it really hard for you to just walk away. That happens a lot more than we think it does. All right. NGO, hello and welcome. Glad to see you in tonight's live chat. I'm looking for one more comment. Okay, before I go back to the content, Lorfit says, yes, they discard you, then bring you back with love bombing when they feel that you are pulling away. Absolutely. Have you ever had a situation where the other person that you're in a bond with, for some reason, you don't have to show that you are backing away. You don't have to give any hints you're backing away. You don't even have to do anything to show them that you're backing away, but they just know it. Have you ever been in a situation like that and you're like, man, how did you know I was getting tired of you? Or you may say to yourself, how did you know that I was displeased with your behavior? We're spiritual and intuitive and feeling beings, right? So we get that. And I think a lot of people who use love bombing, they are very skilled in passive aggressive behaviors. So they understand, they get you. That was a very good point, Lorfit. I agree with that. I agree. NGO, last one. I'm going to go back to the content. NGO says guilt tripping. Yeah. Excuse me. Very much so. Very much so. Okay. Let's finish this out, guys. Okay. So how does this impact you? Well, when you are in a situation with somebody that you are in a very strong, toxic, dysfunctional bond with, you have that kind of a bond, you may lose the ability to objectively evaluate the abuse. You lose the ability to objectively evaluate the abuse. Why? Because you are in such a bond. You're in such a unhealthy dynamic that it's really hard for you to step back and look at the situation in a way that is healthy. That is why it is hard for women to be in intimate partner relationships where they're being domestically abused, or they're being manipulated or violated, or emotionally abused even. It's really hard for them to get out. Why? Because they can't objectively evaluate the situation. They're evaluating the situation based alone on their feelings and what they think, and sometimes even fatigue. Can you believe that? Sometimes even fatigue. That I'm so tired of fighting that if you want to love bomb me and give me all the flowers and the candies and all the hugs and kisses in the world, I'll just accept it, because now I'm tired. I'm exhausted, right? And so when you lose the ability to objectively relate or understand, then you just go with what's happening. And that can keep you in this back and forth dynamic that's not healthy for you. The other issue is broken bonds often become abusive bonds. Broken bonds often become abusive bonds. You don't have a very sturdy, steady, held together bond with your narcissistic mother. Well, down the line, it's probably going to become an abusive relationship. You're not close like this. You're only bonded because of maybe a few things, but that broken, loving, respectful, mutual bond is broken. And so down the line, it's likely to become an abusive one. There's probably going to be arguments. There's probably going to be confrontations. You are probably going to get tired and say things that you probably shouldn't say, and vice versa, right? So broken bonds often become abusive bonds. The other piece of this is you're likely to engage in traumatic reenactments or trauma reenactments. What this means is, let's say you grew up in a very traumatic, unhealthy family dynamic, and now you're an adult, you're trying to have a normal relationship with somebody else, and you find yourself kind of regressing into the ways that you used to behave. all those ways that maybe you grew out of, all of those ways that maybe you have matured past, here they are stirring up again in this relationship. Why? Because it's called a trauma reenactment. I am now reacting into my current situation, all the things that I did in my family that destroyed it or that destroyed me, right? So that's a trauma reenactment. You may also have emotional confusion. Emotional confusion. I don't know how to feel. I don't know what to think. And how do you know what to feel when someone's love bombing you, right? How do you know how to feel when someone's undermining you, invalidating you, gaslighting you? It's confusing, right? So, sometimes that emotional confusion in and of itself is hard to kind of get out of. So it may feel like you're sinking into a rut and you don't know how to see the situation or how to get out of the bond. I think that's why most women who are in domestic violence situations, or that's why most children who are put into foster care systems, they often feel trapped. But as soon as they get out of that situation, they also feel lost because they've become so conditioned over time to that bond, we could say in quotation marks, bond, that now they're out of it. They don't know what to do. You may also fall into additional traps in your adult life. You may fall into additional traps. Yeah, my mom and dad were abusive, and now I'm dating a woman who's abusive, right? I know my dad was abusive. Now I'm dating a woman that's abusive. Or, my dad was abusive to the entire family, and I keep bringing abusive friends into my space, right? So you may fall into additional traps. There may also be a lot of negative symptomatology. A lot of negative symptomatology. What does that mean? Well, a lot of negative thoughts, a lot of negative behaviors, right? Gambling, drinking, doing drugs, having affairs, being in a very open kind of a relationship with somebody, arguing with everybody, being confrontational, not taking medication that is there to save you and help you and make you feel better, right? Dropping out of therapy every time you try to start therapy, feeling depressed, feeling suicidal, feeling anxious, feeling obsessive. That's all negative symptomatology. And if you were to come to a therapist while you're having all those things or experiencing all of those things, we would then have to give you a diagnosis because all of those things have a reason why they're happening. So sometimes we call it negative symptomatology. Intimate partner violence is also something that can happen to you. You come from a very unstable family bond that's dysfunctional, that's disruptive. You're likely going to take that same way of being into another relationship in your life. Not always, not always. I've seen clients who come from, toxic bonds have really healthy relationships, and I'm so proud of them. But there are situations where you can pull from your past and bring it into your present. And then you can be the perpetrator of intimate partner violence. And, self-distraction, avoidance, right? Self-betrayal, that is also something that can happen to you. You just have lost the ability to comfort yourself, praise yourself, keep yourself safe, care about yourself, right? Because you've been in such a bond, you haven't really had the ability to do that. And so sometimes once you're kind of released from that bond, it's really hard to figure out where you belong. So there may be a lot of avoidance, a lot of self-betrayal, and a lot of self-defeating, right? You're defeating yourself. This is quite interesting, right, guys? I really had to there's a lot of research on this topic, so I really had to condense it into something that was bite size, if you will. And we definitely could have a conversation on this tomorrow, but we're not. Tomorrow is about living a life as an adult child to abusive parents. What does that do to you? And what should you do when you are living a life with an abusive parent as an adult? I'm going to pull for some childhood trauma data so that you can see that. But I definitely want to engage you guys, and I welcome you for tomorrow's live chat. We're going to go back to 6:40 p.m. Eastern time. The live chat, I think, is going to be very helpful for those of you who have parents and you're an adult and you still feel abused by them, even as an adult. So we're going to get into that. All right, guys, let me go to the chat box so we can go ahead and wrap up. And hopefully I'm feeling better tomorrow. I cannot wait to go to bed. Orlando says, my ex-wife has narcissistic personality disorder and was hormonal imbalanced. Wow. Yeah. Having narcissistic personality disorder, being, what's the word? Hormonally imbalanced, being emotionally imbalanced, bad combination, right? And sometimes you can't even comfort them because they don't want your comfort. They're too narcissistic to accept your love and affection, right? The Good Glow says, love bombed later in life, and I guess that's why I felt uneasy whenever she said, I love you, because I didn't hear it as a child. I had to be intentional with saying, I love you too, my son. Wow. Ooh, that's a tough one. Yeah. Excuse me. Let me say that you can sometimes, tell me what you think, guys. You can sometimes sense that a person either loves you or doesn't love you just when they say it, right? You can kind of hear behind I love you that you're either lying, you're either telling me the truth, or you're not sure, right? And you can hear that. You know, I love hearing I love you between two married people. That's fantastic. But I've always been, I've always, in sessions where there's a couple, I'm like, oh God, I hope that does not come up. Because sometimes I have to point out, I don't believe you. You know, I rarely do counseling with married couples, but when I have been consulted with, and that string of words, I love you, has come up, there are times where I'm like, oh my God, that doesn't sound sincere. But on a daily basis at my practice, I do hear I love you between a child and a mom, a child and a dad. And I think it's the most beautiful thing. But sometimes you can hear those words, right? The Good Glow. And you just know by the sound of it, no, you don't. That's a lie. You know? It's interesting how we are as humans, isn't it? We can pick up on things so well, especially if you're in tune to that, you know? Michelle Lynn says, Tamara, I was diagnosed with dependent personality disorder after this abuse. If the abuser created me to have a dependency, do I really have a personality disorder? Just the thought. That's a very good thought, and I'm so glad you brought that up. If you were my client, Michelle Lynn, I would have to do a thorough evaluation, excuse me, an evaluation of personality disorder, trauma history, everyday behaviors over the last 2 weeks. And then I would definitely have to do a few sessions with you before I would say, okay, let's put this dependent personality disorder on the back burner. Because here's the thing, when it comes to dependent personality disorder, it is a very rare diagnosis. We rarely, as mental health professionals, diagnose dependent personality. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist for you, but it does kind of leave a question mark there for you and maybe a therapist who may be seeing you. If you aren't, Michelle Lynn, already seeing a therapist, I would suggest considering that, because it could be a possibility, you know, but you also want to consider, is it really worth me even questioning? But, you know, is that a good question? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Sometimes I even, you know, if I have a client that comes to me and says, Tamara, I was diagnosed with PTSD in 1925 for these different reasons, I often do not put post-traumatic stress disorder, that's what I'm trying to say, PTSD on their diagnosis as the primary diagnosis, because I need to know what's been happening in your life that is giving you that diagnosis, right? And sometimes it's not what we think. So I don't know. Maybe you want to get that maybe you should bring that up. I don't know. I think it's a wonderful question, though. Thank you for that. It may cause other people to say, you know what, maybe I'm missing something. Mrs. Prissy, hello and welcome. Glad to see you, and thank you so much for becoming a member of my channel. I really appreciate you for that. Thank you. Jessica J says, my mother-in-law had feelings towards my husband. Like she was trying to be his girlfriend. Sick beyond belief. Ooh. If we did a live chat on that, you'd be surprised how much that happens, Jessica J. And it's not so much that they love and want to protect that person. You're right. There's like a little bit of a you're my spouse, my partner kind of edge to it. And it is disturbing. I had a case like that back in 2016. And I wasn't as experienced as I am 15 years later as I am now. But is that a disturbing dynamic? Yes, and I did see it. And I had to do a lot of child protective services reports, a lot of police reports, because these kind of individuals, if you allow them to be in a room by themselves, that other person is going to be inappropriate. They're going to ask the wrong questions, say the wrong thing, sit too close, touch too much, and there's going to be something that's going to alarm you, It's a very unstable kind of dynamic indeed. Alala Papa, I hope I said that correctly. Welcome. Glad to see you. We're actually going to wrap up here in just a second. Star says the COVID lockdowns brought so much to light, traumatic in many ways. I very much agree with that. Very much agree with that. JKD Merit Master Group says no way. Oh wow, Tamara's story. Yeah. A seat at the king's table says that's so scary, Tam. Yes, absolutely. Can you imagine how I felt as the therapist? Yeah. I would walk out of those sessions and I would literally run to my car. I would kiss the steering wheel. I was so glad the session was over. No, I'm kidding. But that's how I was feeling some of those sessions. Oh, let me tell you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. My mom would agree with you. She would agree. I'm not going to let her see this, Jessica J. You're not going to do this to me live on my own channel. My mom's going to jump on that and she will ban me from all work. She wants to. Nancy R, thank you so much for that. And I love spending Fridays with all of you as well. Let me just say to Ash Shakur Whitaker, hello and welcome. Glad to see you. I see somebody else I want to say hello to. I don't want to leave you out. Sisters Supporting Sisters Ministries. You are wonderful. Guys, I'm so sorry I couldn't get to all of you. Just know that I will see this later. I tell you this all the time. I go back through and I literally read all your comments in the chat box. You have me tearful. You have me cracking up. My family thinks something is seriously wrong with me, but it's because you guys are just so lively. Thank you for that. I will see you guys tomorrow. Hopefully I will feel better and I'll be more like myself. In the meantime, have a wonderful Friday. Thank you so much for your participation. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.